Hi everyone, Stjepan here. I'm going to show you my round 7 game from the Pula Open. So, a bit of context. A week or so before the Pula Open, I asked Mate, who's a FIDE master, to give me something against the King's Indian. I wanted to switch things up from the Semi-Averbakh, and I was looking for a new weapon. That day I was playing a game against my teammate Daniel, and Mate sent me a chess-based file with what you're about to see. And it's a very, very interesting opening. So, a weapon against the King's Indian that, unfortunately, I didn't know very well before the game, because this was my first time playing it, but very interesting nevertheless. So after d4, knight f6, c4, g6, you play the anti-Grunfeld with f3. This, of course, could transpose to the same-ish with knight c3, but I'm going to show you a very specific setup that does not involve knight c3, and the plan is to play knight ge2 followed by knight ec3, and then the other knight goes to a3. And the idea is that both knights are playing against b5 if the center closes. So bishop g7, e4, d6, bishop e3. The normal Zamish move would be knight c3 here, but we want to avoid that. Okay, so castles, queen d2, and now black has two moves, c5 and e5. My opponent played c5, which is the same move Daniel played against me in our training game, and we got a very similar position. Okay, so knight e2, that's the idea. You want to delay d5 until knight c6 comes. Okay, and I mean, black doesn't really have an alternative to knight c6, that's the only natural move. Knight c6, d5, and now the most common move is knight e5, by far. You don't have f4 because of knight g4, and also the pawn is hanging with tempo on the bishop and the queen. So you have to defend. Okay, knight ec3. Once again, our idea is knight a3 playing against b5. And after something like e6, bishop e2, ed, cd, a6, a4, that's the position you normally get. However, Dana played the same move Daniel played against me, knight a5. And the move isn't bad. It's seldom played, but it's not bad. And the idea is the same, put pressure on c4. However, the knight is slightly misplaced. So knight ec3 once again, and here you could go e6 conceivably, e6, knight a3, ed, ed, a6 castles queenside, but she repeated the same line Daniel had played against me. a6, okay, knight a3, now the knights are perfect, playing against b5. And another thing in this position, if you try to play for f5, then I'm going to go g4. For example, knight h5, e8 or d7, all three moves are met with g4, and you don't have b5, you don't have f5. That, in my opinion, is the strategic beauty of this same-ish without knight c3. You're just playing against black's pawn breaks. And the only pawn break you have is e6. And in our training game, Daniel played rook e8 against me. The game went rook e8, rook d1, preventing e6. And I went on to get a +3 position. I could have won a piece, but instead I blundered the piece, and long story short, I lost the game. But rook e8 is not a good move. She played the best move, e6. And now I was debating between, between castles queenside and de6. It's very tempting to play de6, because there are very few ways for black to save the d-pawn. So I took d6. If I had castle, then ed, ed, rook e8, bishop h6, something like that. But I took. Bishop takes, of course, and now rook d1. And the pawn is hanging. If you play knight e8, trying to save the pawn, then bishop c5 wins straight away. There are two possible moves. And I was still, familiar with the position. I hadn't expected her to play knight a5, so you couldn't really call this my prep. But since I had played a training game in this exact line, I sort of knew what I was doing. Queen b6, in my opinion, is the best move. That's what she played. The engine recommends knight c6, which is strange. And after queen d6, knight d7. And the idea is that after queen d2, black gets in f5 with massive counterplay. That's the engine line. I don't think any human would willingly give away the d-pawn for... there's compensation, but whether that's enough or not is debatable. So she played queen b6. And I cannot take the d-pawn, of course, that defends the d-pawn, because queen b2 is hanging and my knights are hanging and I'm losing. So, you know, I don't take. There was a line of... So I must have spent at least 15 minutes here. Not because I didn't know what the best moves were, but I was trying to recall the ideas behind knight a4, and I was trying to assess the position. I ended up playing the best move, bishop e2, but knight a4 is almost as good, and then it clarifies things a lot, leaving black with this weakness. So in hindsight, I think I should have played knight a4, and if I had this position today, I would. So knight a4, of course, if the queen goes to... I don't know. Let's see. If queen c6, putting pressure on the knight, then the knight hangs. If queen c7, I take on d6, because b2 is no longer attacked. If queen d8, I take on d6. So there is one sensible move, queen b4. And of course you have to take this, because if you don't, the queen has infiltrated and the knight is going to be unleashed and b2 is going to be problematic and b5 is coming. So you take. Takes, knight c2 only move. And now b3, ab3, knight b3, sorry, ab3, knight b3, yeah. And I reached this position in my head and I couldn't figure out whether I can play rook d6. I was afraid of knight e8, which is absurd. It doesn't do anything, it attacks the b-pawn, but the b-pawn is defended. So after rook d6, probably knight d7, and now I didn't see that I had knight d4. And knight d4 defends everything. I had completely missed this. This is about equal, but I couldn't visualize well enough to spot knight d4. I didn't see knight d4. After knight d4, white is up a pawn, but black has compensation because of very active bishops. In the end, I played bishop e2, which is the best move, so, you know, no problem there. Knight d7. Black's plan is very clear. Wants to play f5, but also wants to play knight e5, putting pressure on c4. Of course, I can never play b3, because say I play b3, then, you know, queen b4, and my knights are chased away and everything is hanging. So castles and queen b4. Now, queen b4 is a very bad move, and I saw that it was a very bad move, and I ended up playing the best move against it. I spent a significant amount of time here. Of course, any knight d5 fails to queen b2, so I'm not really in a position to move my knight, and the best move by far is queen c1. The idea behind queen c1 is that you're declining the queen trade should this knight move away. You're also putting pressure on d6 with the rook, and it's not easy to find a good move for black. She played knight e5. White has a big advantage, more than +1 according to the engine. And here I spent another, I don't know, at least 15 minutes trying to figure out rook d6. So try to figure out rook d6 if you want. Okay, so rook takes d6, knight e c4, I think. Knight takes c4, knight takes c4, bishop c4, bishop c4, rook fd1. Very big advantage for white. Why I couldn't visualize this, I don't know. So rook d6 takes, 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 bishop takes, bishop takes, rook fd1. What could possibly go wrong in this position? I'm dominating the d file, c5 is under fire. I cannot explain why I didn't go for this. Seems like a very, very clear position to me. White has an edge. Instead, I played something fancy, which ended up giving me a great position, but I couldn't find the follow-up that makes it a great position. I played knight c2, chasing the queen away, and the queen must go to b6, that's the only square, and now knight a4. Okay. The queen goes to c6, and technically I could find an alternative to b3, but I had, you know, been meaning to play b3. And I saw that the c4 pawn was hanging because the knight was attacked. And let me explain my reasoning here. she stared at the position for about a couple of minutes and then, of course, took the pawn. In my mind, I thought that the d6 pawn was hanging in the end, which is absurd. It's not hanging because there's a knight on c4, my bishop on e3 is attacked, and the knight on c4 defends the d-pawn. So this turned out to be a very simple blunder. So she took knight ec4. However, white is very close to winning here because of an attacking idea we had both missed. I would like you to pause the video here and find out why white is close to winning. So I ended up taking the knight, and of course the position is absolutely losing. So, takes queen a4. And once c4 hangs, once c4 is taken, there's pressure on d6, so I did end up taking, but it doesn't work because of bishop c4 or knight c4, and I'm just down material. C4 is hanging, a2 is hanging, bishop b2 is coming, and I'm losing. I ended up losing the game like this. Bishop takes c4, knight takes c4, rook d3. My idea was to try and trap the queen. Not that it works, but I tried. I knew that I was absolutely busted. So b6 saves the pawn, bishop f2, saving the bishop, queen a2, rook fd1. I wanted to somehow play rook a3. My idea was to play knight e3. So, for example, random move, knight e3 here and here. So I wanted to do that. Unfortunately, the queen can run away to e6. So I tried to do something about that. I mean, it doesn't work. She played a5, I played rook d5. And the idea now is that after knight e3, I could go rook d3, rook a3, trapping the queen, but I simply don't have time. a4, f4, and bishop b2. Here I resigned. Now let's go back to the interesting position. When she took on c4, I had bishop h6, and this is an incredible move. So, first of all, what if she does nothing? Let's say, knight b6. I take on g7, king g7, and knight c3. And I have a massive initiative here. So, for example, let's give white a move. Knight d7. That seems like a good move. f4. b5, maybe. f5. Busted. If you try to save the bishop with f5, then bishop f3. Busted. So in bishop h6, what happens if black takes the bishop? This is the main idea. So the knight still isn't hanging, and black doesn't have to move the knight. But say they do, knight e5. The idea is f4, followed by rook f3, rook h3, and f5. Knight d7, f5, game over. If black plays a random move like rook a d8, then f4 again. f5 is coming, and if black plays f5, then knight c3. Now this knight is hanging. Knight b6 and g4. And white is crushing black. I didn't see any of this. Of course, I didn't even think of bishop h6. But it's funny that what turned out to be a game-losing blunder was in fact almost winning for me. Yeah, so I need to work on my tactical ideas. And this was my second loss of the tournament. Unfortunately, I still had a good tournament. It was a bit embarrassing to lose in 18 moves, but I messed things up. I should have, instead of knight c2, simply played rook d6 and, normal position. So yeah, this wasn't a clean game at all, and I also have to say that when I lost the game, I still had plenty of time on the clock, so really no excuses. A relatively simple position, not this one, bishop h6 is hard to see, but the position before knight c2 is relatively simple. I had a bunch of time, and I should have navigated it better. Thank you for watching, hope you got something from the game, hope you got a new idea about what to play against the King's Indian. Stay tuned for more chess, bye bye.